we need to talk about one of the strongest, most unexpected, and honestly, most beautiful wrestling stories of 2026. Because while Double or Nothing of 2026 might still be sitting there as one of the greatest overall pay-per-views or PLEs of the year, whichever way you guys want to call it, I'm going to say this right now, and I'm sure a ton of people will agree. At this moment, the mask versus mask match in AAA between the two Grande Americanos might be my match of the year for this year so far. And before anyone jumps the gun saying, oh, well, everyone's saying that. Well, hear me out. Because to me, it's not just because of the wrestling. And it's not because of the blood, not even because of the crowd, even though they were magnificent. Shout out to all the Mexican people for making that event sound amazing. But it was because this story was simple. It was a story of good versus evil, and it was also arrogance versus acceptance. It was a man who wanted to take a culture and make it his own against a man who just wanted to embrace that culture, respect it, love it, and it was accepted because of that. And somehow, what started as Chad Gable and a ridiculous mask gimmick became one of the strongest wrestling stories WWE and AAA have told for the past year. Because this was never really about the mask. It was all about respect. It was also about identity. It was about the culture. And it was about who gets to wear something sacred and who actually earns it. Now, the history of the Grande Americano feud, how Chad Gable created the joke, how another man gave it a soul, and Mexico made the final decision. To understand why this story worked so freaking well, we have to go back to the very beginning of this whole thing. The whole thing starts with Chad Gable developing what I would call a lucha problem. Gable wanted to prove he could solve Lucha Libre. He wanted to prove that his wrestling, his technique, his Olympic style background, his way of doing things could beat the mystery, the speed, the rhythm, and the tradition of lucha. And then he runs into Penta. This was back in 2025 on Raw. Chad Gable asked Adam Pearce to find him a great luchador. And who answers the challenge? Penta. And Penta beats him. Now, on paper, that's just a match result. But in storyline, that loss was important for Gable, at least, because he was not just beaten by another wrestler. He was beaten by Lucha Libre itself. And for a character like Gable, someone obsessed with control, discipline, technique, and proving he is smarter than everyone else, that kind of loss ate at him. It eats on at him. So instead of respecting Lucha, he tries to mock it. He tries to beat it by becoming a twisted version of it. And that is where El Grande Americano was born. When El Grande Americano first appears, the whole thing is ridiculous on purpose. The music, the dancing, the exaggerated presentation, the fake cultural references he made, the whole idea of this American luchador claiming this strange Gulf of America identity location, it was not subtle at all, and it wasn't even supposed to be subtle. This version of El Grande Americano was Chad Gable taking Lucha Libre and turning it into a joke. And that is why it worked as heat, because in Mexico and in Lucha Libre, the mask is not just an accessory to your gear. The mask is not even a costume or even a cosplay. The mask is identity. It is family. It is lineage for many. And it is honor. It is the soul of the character. So when Gable, under this mask, starts disrespecting people like Dragon Lee, trying to unmask his opponents and using that loaded mask headbutt as a weapon, he becomes more than just a cheater. He becomes a perfect definition of rudo, not because he's just breaking rules, but because he is disrespecting something sacred. This is what made this character very interesting. At first, it was funny. To some, not to everyone, but underneath the comedy was a real villain, a man using someone else's culture as the weapon. Then WrestleMania 41 happens and the character becomes bigger. Rey Mysterio was originally supposed to place at Grande Americano. That was the whole intent of this whole situation. It was leading to WrestleMania 41. But Rey was unfortunately not medically cleared due to injury, so Rey Fenix stepped in. He just became part of WWE, so it was a great opportunity for him. And El Grande Americano defeats Rey Fenix at WrestleMania. Now that win was important because now this fake luchador persona has beaten a real lucha star on the biggest stage in WWE. And at the same time that this happens, few hours before, WWE is moving deeper into the AAA world because that's when WWE announced the AAA acquisition. And because of it, we get a future event when Worlds Collides shows up in a future months to come. WWE and AAA talent are now being presented in the same wrestling universe. So El Grande Americano is no longer just a raw comedy character. He is now attached to something much bigger. He is attached to WWE, entering the world of Mexican Lucha Libre. And whether WWE meant it or not, originally, they gave that character a whole new layer of identity because now this story was not just Chad Gable mocking Lucha. It was happening during a time where WWE and TKO were literally entering this AAA world. And it's important, honestly, when it comes to it because when you're entering a story about outsiders stepping into someone else's culture, someone else's land, someone else's wrestling tradition, that story suddenly starts to feel bigger than the character itself. It starts to reflect the real life tension of what happens when a giant company buys into a culture it did not create. And that is where this feud starts becoming more than a gimmick. Eventually, we have Chad Gable getting injured, and WWE had a decision to make when that happened. They could have killed the character of El Grande Americano, or they could have paused the story. They could also have just moved on. Instead, they put the mask on another man. And this is where everything changes. Because at first, this could have gone terribly wrong. Let's really be honest about that. We have another man wearing a Mexican-inspired mask. We don't know this man, apparently, who he is. To this date, we don't know who he is. He might be German for all we know. Or he might be tall, German. Maybe he hung out with someone like, I don't know, Gunther or Walter. I don't know. Who knows where this man came from, but this man could have been rejected immediately. The fans could have looked at him and said, no, absolutely not. We are not doing this. Boom. Get out of here. They could have booed him. They could have kicked him out of Monterrey. They could have kicked him out of Mexico City. For all we know, they could pitchfork or whatever. But this man did something very important. This replacement of Chad Gable did something more important than Chad Gable could have ever done. He did not play the character like Gable. He did not make Mexico the punchline anymore. He instead did not make Lucha the joke anymore. He flipped the entire meaning of El Grande Americano. Gable's version was built to mock. This new man's version was built to honor the Mexican culture. And that is why the Mexican people gravitated to him so freaking well, to the point that it became beautiful. And it wasn't because they thought he was Mexican. Absolutely not. It was very obvious the man wasn't Mexican at all. And he even admitted to it. And it wasn't because he was pretending to be something he was not. They gravitated to him because he treated Mexico like something worth celebrating. And he showed it the right way. He spoke Spanish. He embraced the colors of the Mexican flag within his gimmick, within his mask, within his leotards, and so on. He sang Cielito Lindo. If you know how much that means to them, you already know. He leaned into specific cultural references. You can see it in some of his interviews. He was not just doing generic Mexican stuff. He showed effort, he showed affection, he showed humility. And wrestling fans can feel that. Especially the Lucha Libre fans, especially can feel that. It was such a connection of someone they saw trying to embrace the culture, be part of the culture, to be accepted into their arena. And people notice when you do well-intended things that they will accept you. which is why his gimmick works so well in AAA versus OG Grande Americano. They know the difference between cheap cosplay and real commitment, and that is why this man's El Grande Americano worked, because he wore the mask like it meant something. Honestly, that's the best way to frame it. Chad Gable wore the mask as an insult. This other man wore the mask like a responsibility. Then the story gets even better. At the 2026 Royal Rumble, the identity crisis fully explodes. And honestly, I didn't know if we were going to get that, but I am glad we did. El Grande Americano, the most recent iteration, enters the Royal Rumble. Then a few minutes later, the original El Grande Americano enters. And now we have two men wearing the same legacy. We literally had like two Spider-Mans kind of scenario pointed at each other. Two men fighting over one identity became a thing now. One man was saying, I created this, I wore the mask first, you stole my character. And the other one basically saying, you may have worn it first, but I made it mean something. This is such simple wrestling storytelling. And I don't want anyone to take it the wrong way, because honestly, it's meant to be a compliment, because wrestling does not always need to be complicated when it comes to storytelling. Sometimes all you need is a clear emotional question like this one, which is, who is the real one? Is it the person who created the mask? Or is it the person who made the people believe in it? That is what made this feud work. It was no longer just two guys in the same mask. It became creator versus the successor, or the one that inspires everyone. Parity versus respect. Ownership versus acceptance. A man trying to take culture for himself, for his own gain, against a man who embraced it by the culture because he showed love to it. Then the feud expands. We get Los Americanos, we get Los Americanos Hermanos, we get Chaos on Raw, we get Dominic Mysterio involved with the AAA Mega Campeonato, we get the loaded mask headbutt still being used as this dangerous cheating device. But underneath all this madness, the core of the story remains very simple. Which Americano is real? The one who started it, or the one who the people accepted? And that is why the faction stuff worked for the most part. It probably wasn't needed, but it was a nice little accent. Because honestly, it made the story feel bigger without losing the emotional center. The loaded mask, the unmasking attempts that they try to do to each other, the chaos, the interference, all of this was built around the same question. Who owns the soul of El Grande Americano? And then AAA does what AAA does best. They turn this in a full lucha melodrama. And I mean that in the best possible way and respect, because this was not just two wrestlers having matches. This became a story of betrayal, romance, revenge, comedy, blood, masks, music, crowd emotion. It became theatrical. It became dramatic. It became a telenovela inside a wrestling ring. Honestly, that is how I always saw wrestling since I was a kid. It was a boy's way to watch soap opera, telenovela. I always watched telenovela with my mother when I was a younger kid because I had no choice. One TV at home. I had to watch what she had to watch at the end of the day. So me gravitating to wrestling just made sense, because sometimes the storytelling that they do is basically another way to tell a telenovela. And I loved it. And that's why part of the reason I fall in love with watching wrestling, and why to me sometimes storytelling is needed, just like this one. You have Andrea Bazarte tied into this whole story too. You have Pimpinela Escarlata. You have Pimpy pulled into the revenge callbacks. You have mariachi entrances. You have disguises. You have people getting involved at the perfect moments. And this is where I think WWE fans who do not watch Lucha Libre often got a little taste of what Lucha can be. Because Lucha Libre can be wild. It can be over the top, dramatic, emotional. It and to the point, over the top. But when it is done right, it all makes sense because the crowd understands the language of the story. And that is why this match could only have worked in Mexico. In all honesty, I don't think this match would have worked anywhere else, because the Mexican people were not just watching this story how we usually watch stories in the States. They were part of the story for the most part. They were almost a fourth main character. You have Gable, you have the other Grande Americano, you can include the Mask or Andrea as the other characters, and you had the Mexican crowd. With that crowd, this match honestly wouldn't be the same. Without that noise, the aggression, the emotion behind the crowd, those parades they did for the Grande Americano, those serenade that they did for them. Without that culture, this story does not hit the same. Without the acceptance they had for the most latest version of El Grande Americano, it does not become what it became on March 30th. This is why Lucha Libre promotions like AAA and CMLL are special when it comes to wrestling, because to make Lucha Libre work, you have to really understand the culture. You cannot just take the mask, take the moves, take the pageantry, and think you can make a story out of it. You honestly got to understand, in order to write great storytelling for these companies, you have to understand the culture and what makes people gravitate towards it. So honestly, I feel that is such a hard task that if whoever The Undertaker is working with to create these recent stories, applaud to him and his team, because they did something that I honestly wish Raw and SmackDown can learn from. Because we've lost some of that beauty when NXT Black and Gold disappeared. And now we honestly have it with OA. Wish Raw and SmackDown can learn from this. But anyway, you have to understand why this is important. We get the blow off of this whole thing on March 30th of this year, 2026. AAA Noche de Los Grandes, Monterrey, Mexico, right? El Grande Americano versus El Original El Grande Americano. Mask versus Mask. And this was everything it needed to be. It was such a beautiful match. It was storytelling in every move that they did. It was violent. It was so dramatic. It was emotional for us. Everyone was in their feet, back and forth, seeing how El Original was dominating our Grande Americano. He was taking him down. He started ripping his mask, making him bleed. Both men were bleeding by the end of this. Both men fighting like this was not about winning a match. It was about deciding who gets to carry the identity going forward. And all the callbacks from the previous storytelling for this feud was there. We had the Creed brothers. We had Rayo and Bravo. Ojitos de Huevo, right? We have Pimpy. We had everything from the story from previous came back in a way that made this match feel like a grand true finale for this feud. And then El Grande Americano wins. The most recent version of this character is our winner. The man that was embraced by Mexico defeats the man who tried to mock it from 2025. And then Original El Grande Americano had to unmask. And underneath the mask is Chad Gable. And I love that ending because, we always knew who these two men were. Let's be real. And I'm honestly just pretending I don't know who the latest Grande Americano is for the sake of the video. And if you know who he is, you guys know. So, but I just think it was hilarious when he revealed himself. We all acted shocked because like, oh my God, it's Chad Gable, it's Chad Gable. I even told my wife, I'm like, oh, I bet you it's... I just said some random name. I forgot who I said. And she's like, come on, man, you know who it is. I'm like, no, I don't. It was just hilarious that we were all pretending as an inside joke, as a whole wrestling community. We were pretending we didn't know who they were. And we would play jokes online. If only Chad Gable showed up. If only this guy showed up. What happened to these guys? These guys haven't been wrestling since 2025. We haven't seen them ever since. It was all hilarious. But down the line, when it comes to the mask, in Lucha Libre, losing the mask means something. It wasn't it wasn't all about the stipulation. It is a sacrifice when it comes to the Lucha Libre culture. It is an admission, end of an identity that most people knew. And when Chad Gable gave up his mask, the story says exactly what it needed to say. He may have created El Grande Americano, but he did not become El Grande Americano. What that means basically, even though he was the first one, the one that won is the one that's going to carry the legacy like it's supposed to. So it was beautiful. I think that line was I may have not said the line exactly, but what Gable said was so beautiful and was so respected that the whole crowd, although he was such an ass to us, the people respected for what he did, for giving us such a freaking good story and gave us such a climactic ending. Because it was just beautiful. The back and forth between, I almost cried near the end of that, because it was such an emotions that you get, because we had such a storyline that honestly we all as a group probably rejected at first. We eventually gravitated towards it. That says a lot. The mask did not belong to the man who wore it first at the end of the day. It belonged to the man who made the people believe in him. Honestly, this is where I want to get personal for a sec, because I love this story from as soon as we found out the dual identity to the most recent end. And part of the reason is it's connected with me is because I understood the feeling behind what the most recent Grande Americano was dealing with. When I watched the one that was beloved and accepted by the Mexican people, it reminded me of a moment in my own life. You know, me and my mother traveled to another world. And when I mean another world, we left the US when I was younger. We went to South America. We were going somewhere that was not originally ours. So we embraced that culture. We started learning from the place. We respected the culture while trying to we still try to keep our own identity, or at least my mom did. I was too young to understand. So I was able to easily gravitate towards the culture. And we all trying to embrace it the right way. And that feeling, what it means when people accept you, not because you are pretending to be them, but because you are showing them the respect and trying to embrace that culture. That is what this story captured, and that's why it hit me really the way it did. Because it wasn't just about foreigners wearing masks and getting cheered. It was a story about love from different cultures. It was acceptance. It was all about the difference between taking and embracing. And that is just simple story. But sometimes simple does not mean it's basic. Simple storytelling can be powerful when the emotions are real. And I hope writers, when it comes to wrestling, understand that. Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's basic. It's simple storytelling can be powerful. You just have to understand how the emotion that people react to can make it work. Once you know that, you don't need to overthink stuff. That's what this was. A man who wanted to steal culture for himself versus a man who wanted to honor it and be accepted by it. And that is wrestling. In its simplest, truest form. And also that is what Lucha Libre is. This is why this match worked. And there's another layer here too that I want to get to when it comes to this video, because you can also look at this story and connect it to WWE and TKO's buyout of AAA. You have this real world situation where WWE, this massive machine, is stepping into the AAA world. And fans are naturally going to ask when these type of situations happen, are they going to respect it, or are they here to take from it? And are they here to let AAA be AAA? Or are they going to invade it, sanitize it, and turn it into something else? That is why the Grande Americano story became even more interesting to me, because the story itself is about outsiders entering a culture. One outsider disrespects it and wants it for his own gain, and another outsider embraces it to become a better person. And the people decide who is worthy at the end of the day. And from that is exactly the lesson WWE honestly should learn from all this. If WWE as a company is going to work with AAA, then honestly, after seeing this, and hopefully they understand, just let AAA be AAA. Let Lucha Libre be wild. Let it be emotional like the way we saw it. Let it be over dramatic, telenovela style even. Let it be theatrical, and just let the culture breathe the way it's supposed to when it comes to Lucha Libre. Because if this story proves anything, it is that there is an audience for this. And for non-Lucha Libre fans, this honestly was the most perfect entry point you guys can get. It was easy to understand. It was a simple good versus evil, mockery versus respect, the thief versus the adopted hero. But if WWE allows AAA to really do their thing, Lucha Libre can go even crazier than this. Honestly, if you look at their past history, you would see old tapes, old matches that can even go wilder than this. And I mean that in the most respectful and best way possible. And before we close, I need to give Chad Gable his flowers, because if WWE did not know what Chad Gable is capable of before, they should really know now. This man helped carry one of the best stories of the year. He took a ridiculous concept and made it work. He gave this story its villain. He gave the mask its original sin. He made the audience want to see him lose this identity he created. It's honestly not an easy thing to capture. This is probably the best example of real character work. And now, more than ever, Chad Gable deserves more prominence on the main roster after this. You know he can do it. Because Gable has shown that he can do comedy. He definitely can. He can do technical, beautiful, pure wrestling. And he can do serious storytelling, heel work, character work. He can do it all. This man is such a complex worker, he's able to chameleon any way he can. Even though it's obvious and ridiculous, he makes you want to continue watching. He can do all of it. He deserves more from WWE in all its sense, and I think everyone should be speaking out about that. And when it comes to the other man that we don't know the identity of yet, he deserves his credit too, because that man took something that could have been rejected immediately and turned it into something so emotional. He did not just wear that mask, he gave it heart. So when I look back at this feud, I do not see it as just a funny wrestling angle that got out of hand at some point. Now, after seeing all this, I see it as one of the best examples of how wrestling can make something ridiculous and turn it into something meaningful. Now, we're always okay with having stories that start weird, but if it comes to a meaningful end, it was worth it. Now, we were all not gravitating to the Grande Americano character in the beginning. If someone was, they're probably one of the few, but many people weren't. But they somehow turned it around and made it into something so important that now we say, sometimes we can do weird gimmicks as long as this can happen. And this is the perfect example of what to do. The Grande Americano feud started as a joke, but by the end, it became a story about identity, respect, culture, and acceptance. Chad Gable may have been the first man to wear the mask, but the other gentleman became the man the mask chose. The people chose. Because in Lucha Libre, the mask is not just the fabric, it is the identity, the honor, it is also the soul of the character. And at Noche de Los Grandes, Mexico told the whole world exactly who El Grande Americano really was. Chad Gable created the joke. The other man gave its meaning to that mask, and the Mexican people turned it into a pure magic for wrestling. That is why, for me, the mask versus mask match is not just one of the best matches of 2026. Right now, at this point of time, it might be match of the year. And that's the tea drop. As always, if you enjoyed the tea, please hit the like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.